In this video, I want to take some time to talk about some things that React Router is actually currently passing into our component that we don't know about. So when React Router finds a route and it's a match, it renders an instance of that component. And we know this. We've seen all of our components get rendered. If I go to the help page, I get an instance of the help component. Not only is it rendering the component, it's also passing a few props down. So anytime we use a component inside of a route, we get access to some special information. What we're going to do is actually just dump it to the console. We'll take a look at exactly what we get and how it's useful. For this one, let's go ahead and make some changes to the edit expense page component that currently sits over here. What we're going to do is we're going to get access to those props. And we're going to go ahead and switch up this component from implicitly returning some JSX to explicitly defining a body and returning the JSX. So I'll take the parentheses and everything inside of them, cut them out, set up my curly braces for the arrow function, and I will return exactly what I just cut out. So now we have the exact same thing. The only reason I converted it is so I can actually just use console.log to dump the props to the screen. Now, if we didn't know any better, we would expect that there are no props passed in, but that's not true. React Router is passing a few values down. Now, we're only going to see the log print when we head over to the edit expense page. So let's do just that. When I visit the page, down below, the props object prints, and we can take a look at all of the props that React Router passes into our components, and it's actually quite a few. So first up, we have history. History is very useful. This is an object, and it contains a bunch of properties, most of which are methods, and these allow us to manipulate the history. They allow us to do things like redirect the user programmatically via JavaScript. Currently, the only way the user can change pages is if they explicitly click a link. But later on, we might want to change that up. For example, what if I create an expense? I type all the data in, I submit the form. Once I submit valid data, am I just going to keep the user on that page? No, I'm going to redirect them over to the dashboard page where they can view that expense alongside of all of their other expenses. So if we take a quick look at history, we see we have things like go back, go forward, push, replace. All of these allow us to manipulate where the user is with JavaScript. We're going to be making extensive use of history later as we start building out Expensify. For now, it's just important to know that it exists. Next, I want to explore Match. Match contains a little bit of useful information. The one thing on here that we're going to be using later on is the params object, which is currently not existent. It's just an empty object. Later on, though, it will contain some useful stuff as we set up more dynamic URLs. For the moment, it really just contains information about why the current route is considered a match. It's an exact match. We have the path we were matching, and we have the URL. Location is also pretty interesting. This contains information about the current URL. So for the moment, we just have /edit, but as we add hash values and query strings, those are going to show up here as well. So let me switch back over to the edit page and change the URL a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and set up a query string that is ? Followed by a bunch of key value pairs. For example, I could set query equal to my search query. Maybe I'm searching for all expenses that have rent somewhere in the description, and maybe I want to sort by date. So being able to provide these key value pairs, as many as we like, is really useful. It's going to allow us to filter data. For now, we can just take a look at where these end up. If I visit this URL and I crack open location, we can see right here we have the search value populated. It was an empty string. We now have the query string showing up, and we can do something meaningful with those values, like filter the data that's shown to the screen. We can also populate hash, that is the hash value. So right here, I would use the hash symbol followed by something like contact us. This would scroll us down to the element on the page that had an ID of contact us, and that's very useful for long pages. We can also access that on location right here. We have the hash value of contact us. And now that we have some basic information about the URL, there is just one more feature I want to explore. We're getting a bunch of information passed in. What we're going to do, though, is figure out how we can set up dynamic URLs. So the edit URL, for example, that's not a very good URL. What are we trying to edit? There's got to be something. Later on, we're going to have items in a database, and they're going to have unique IDs associated with them. If I wanted to edit the expense with an ID of 44, I would have a URL that looks a little more like this. Now, the question is, how do we access the dynamic part of the URL, and how do we set this up over inside of React Router? How do we say we want to match edit / something, where this could be anything. It could be 44, it could be 107, it could be 99. This part needs to be dynamic. This part needs to be static. Well, React Router, like all routing tools, gives us a way to get that done, and we're going to explore that by making a change to our configuration. So let's crack open App Router, and we're going to be changing this route right here, the current edit route. Now, if we try to change the path to something like /44, it's literally only going to match edit /44. What we want to do is make this part dynamic, and we also want to be able to grab that value. And to do that, we use the following syntax: colon, some sort of variable name. So I'm going to use $ID. This is going to dynamically match whatever comes after the /. It could be 44, it could be 107, it could be the string testing, and it's going to give us access to that value. So we can do something meaningful, like fetch the item from the database and populate the form fields so the user can actually edit the expense. Now, what does this look like in practice? Well, we can actually just save App Router and mess around with that. I'm going to save App Router as it currently stands. I'm going to visit the edit 99 page. And right here, you can see this is from my edit expense component. And down below, we are getting our props printing to the screen. If I crack open location, you're going to notice that nothing has changed. Accessing the URL parameter that actually sits inside of match params. So this object was previously empty, but if I visit it now, you can see we have key value pairs. We have, in our case, just one. We have ID with a value of 99. So we could grab that value, we could fetch the item from the database, and we could show that stuff to the screen. For now, though, if we wanted to, we could just change the edit expense page to say something like editing the expense with ID of, and we could dump the ID to the screen. So we can use a JavaScript expression to access props dot match dot params dot ID. Now we're going to be able to actually view that value, and sitting over here, we get 99 showing. If I were to change this to the item with an ID of 102, we would have 102 showing up. So we now have a URL that has some structure, but also has a part that is indeed dynamic. Now, if I visit /edit, which used to work, we're going to see that we're getting a 404 for that because there is nothing after. There are no query parameters, and that's exactly what we want. We're never really going to have just a root edit page like this. So we can actually just remove that from the navigation altogether. Over inside of the header component, I'm going to strip the edit nav link. That's not going to be necessary. And we're just going to leave our other three links in place. We have our dashboard page. We can be perfectly content with a URL that doesn't have anything dynamic. We have the create expense page. Once again, we don't need anything dynamic. There's no data we need to grab. And the help page, which is just going to show some static content. So at this point, we have a lot more tools in our tool belt, though I don't expect it to be clear exactly when you would use which. The whole goal of this video was to just make you aware that React Router is indeed passing stuff in, and that stuff can be useful as we start building more real-world applications. It's worth noting that React Router is only going to pass these props down to components that are actually used inside of a route, like these 5. These 5 will have access to the props we just explored. Header, though, header is not going to have access because header was not set up as the component value for a route. So if we try to dump the props for header, we would get an empty object, which is exactly what you might expect. In the next video, you're going to put your skills to the test by going through this entire process on your own. You're going to have to build up a brand new router using certain URLs that I will give you. You're going to have to show certain things on those pages. It's going to give you some real hands-on experience creating your own router. I'm very excited to get to that, so let's go ahead and dive right into the final video for this section.